The night was quiet, the streets of Colombia eerily calm. But in the heart of the bustling city of Medellin, a darkness was lurking in the shadows, a darkness that would soon be uncovered in the most chilling of ways. It started with a missing persons report, just another case of a young boy, one of many, disappearing into the night. But little did anyone know that this case was different. A simple investigation would soon unveil something so horrifying, it would leave the nation and the world in shock. As police dug deeper, they discovered a trail of abandoned, tormented bodies, each one more heart-wrenching than the last. A serial killer, dubbed La Bestia, the Beast, had been operating undetected for years. He was a man who preyed on the most vulnerable of society, homeless boys. His method of torture and murder was unfathomable, and what he left behind was even worse, a chilling collection of notebooks chronicling each gruesome crime. And just when they thought they had everything figured out, the real nightmare began to unfold. Luis Garavito, born in 1957 in the rural town of Genova, Colombia, had a seemingly normal upbringing. However, behind the facade of an ordinary life, Garavito's childhood was filled with abuse, neglect, and poverty. His father was an alcoholic and an abuser, and Garavito's early life was marked by physical and emotional scars. As he grew older, Garavito became a man driven by dark, twisted desires. He would later confess that he had always been attracted to young boys, those who were vulnerable, isolated, and most easily manipulated. Over time, he began to act on these urges. His first known victim was a 9-year-old boy in the early 1990s, but it would take years before authorities would begin to connect the dots. Garavito's victims were often homeless boys, living in the streets, or boys from marginalized communities with no one to miss them. He would offer them gifts, food, or promises of work, luring them to isolated areas where he would then take control. His modus operandi was horrifying. He would often torture his victims, strangling them, and leaving their bodies discarded in remote areas. He would then keep notebooks, writing down detailed accounts of his crimes. These notebooks would later serve as chilling evidence, painting a horrifying portrait of a man who had no remorse for his actions. Between 1992 and 1999, Garavito is believed to have murdered over 300 children, although he was convicted of 138 murders. The true number of his victims remains uncertain, as many of the bodies were never discovered, and many of his victims were never reported missing. The first confirmed victim of Garavito was a 12-year-old boy, who disappeared in 1992. Garavito's method was always the same. He would offer the boy a ride, a meal, or simply lure them into an isolated spot. Once there, he would overpower them, subjecting them to unspeakable acts before ultimately killing them. One of the most chilling details of Garavito's crimes was his meticulous planning. He would often keep his victims alive for hours, sometimes days, and would torture them relentlessly. His acts of violence were not just physical, but psychological as well, as he manipulated the boys into trusting him before betraying them in the most horrific way. The details of his crimes were unfathomable. Garavito would often write down everything in his journals, documenting the time, place, and nature of the abuse. His journals would become a key piece of evidence during his trial, providing investigators with an insight into the mind of a sadistic killer. As Garavito continued his reign of terror, the authorities remained unaware of the true scope of his crimes. The police initially believed that the boys were simply running away or falling victim to other criminals. It wasn't until 1999 that the true horror of Garavito's actions began to come to light. The breakthrough came when a group of investigators, led by Colombia's elite police force, began connecting the dots between several missing children. They noticed a disturbing pattern. The boys who had disappeared were all from marginalized backgrounds, often living in the streets. The investigators soon began to realize that these boys were being targeted by someone with a specific method of operation. They began to suspect that a serial killer was at work, but they had no leads, no witnesses, no physical evidence, nothing to tie the murders together. But everything changed when Garavito was finally caught in 1999. Garavito was arrested after he was spotted near one of the crime scenes, behaving suspiciously. He was taken into custody, but at first, he denied any involvement in the murders. However, as investigators dug deeper, they began to find overwhelming evidence linking him to the crimes. It was his notebooks that sealed his fate. Inside, Garavito had detailed each of his victims, including their names, ages, and the gruesome details of their deaths. The notebooks were a chilling chronicle of his twisted mind, and they provided the police with irrefutable evidence of his guilt. In 2001, Luis Garavito was convicted of 138 murders. He was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison, the longest sentence in Colombian history. However, due to Colombian law, which allows for sentence reductions based on good behavior, Garavito could potentially be released after serving only a fraction of his sentence. The news of his conviction sent shockwaves through Colombia and the rest of the world. The media was captivated by the case, and Garavito's name became synonymous with evil. His crimes sparked widespread outrage, especially when it was revealed that he had targeted some of society's most vulnerable children. Despite his conviction, many questions remain unanswered. The true number of Garavito's victims is unknown, and many families are still left without closure. Some believe that he may have been part of a larger network of criminals, while others argue that he acted alone. Garavito's story is a stark reminder of the horrors that can lie hidden in the most unsuspecting places. It serves as a warning about the dangers that lurk in the shadows, preying on the most vulnerable members of society. Luis Garavito is a name that will forever be etched in the annals of true crime history. His heinous acts, his chilling confessions, and the horror he inflicted on countless innocent lives are a testament to the darkest aspects of human nature. But beyond the terror, beyond the horror, this case forces us to ask a difficult question. How could someone like Garavito exist? What drives a person to commit such unspeakable acts? And perhaps more importantly, how do we protect those who are most vulnerable to such predators? As we reflect on this case, let us remember the lives that were lost, the innocent boys who were taken from their families far too soon. Let us also remember the survivors, the ones who escaped Garavito's clutches and lived to tell the tale. And finally, let us never forget the lesson that this case teaches us, that evil can exist in the most unexpected places, and we must always be vigilant, always be aware of the dangers that lurk in the shadows.